So, the World Cup is finally here, and to celebrate, let's go through each of the 48 countries that have qualified and cover one, sometimes a couple, fun facts about them. Now, these facts can be anything from interesting to funny to just weird. And I do want to make these facts about the countries themselves, so they'll mostly not be about football. We're gonna go through every country in order of their FIFA ranking, so without further ado, here's a fun fact about every single country at the World Cup. 85. New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, but at this year's World Cup, it has the lowest ranked national team participating in it. Now, New Zealand is home to the Kiwi bird, the Maori people with their famous war dance, and Tim Payne, the most famous person of all time. New Zealand also has a lot of sheep. In fact, the country has more sheep than people, but everyone knows all of this. So our fun fact is that New Zealand once held a referendum for changing their flag. To come up with new designs, they decided to hold a flag design contest where everyone in the country could participate, which led to over 10,000 submissions, including this one, and this one. For some reason though, they didn't pick any of these and went with this instead, and eventually they just decided to not change the flag at all. 83. Haiti. If you've ever looked at the flag of Haiti, you've probably noticed that they have this weird white box in the middle, like they forgot to crop out the PNG when they made it. But why do they actually have that? Well, originally, Haiti's international flag was just a plain red and blue design, kinda like Tom Scott, except upside down. But then at the 1936 Olympics, they ran into a little country called Liechtenstein that had the exact same flag. Now, they had never noticed this before, because it was Liechtenstein, but to avoid future confusion, both countries decided to change their flags. Liechtenstein added a crown to their flag, meanwhile Haiti decided to make their special government flag, which had the coat of arms on it, into their main international flag. Okay, but why doesn't it have a transparent background? Well, it's because the white panel helps the coat of arms to stand out from the background. Now, it might be a bit crude. That was the end of the sentence. 82. Curaçao. Now, Curaçao is of course the smallest nation to ever feature at a World Cup, at only 155,000 people. And even if you want to say that that's not true, because almost all of their players were basically born and raised in the Netherlands, even if you combine the Curaçaoans on both the island and the Netherlands, it's still the smallest nation ever at a World Cup. But that's not our fun fact, because I think everyone knows that. Our fun fact is that the Curaçao national team has only existed for 15 years. See, Curaçao used to be a part of the Netherlands Antilles national team, which also included Aruba, Bonaire, and a bunch of other Dutch-controlled islands in the Caribbean. This lasted until 2010, when the Netherlands divided the islands into their own separate political entities, leading Curaçao to form its own national football team in 2011. It took them less than 15 years to qualify for the World Cup. For comparison, Italy will go at least 15 years without qualifying for a World Cup. 74. Ghana. This meme is from Ghana, but it's a lot more interesting than just that. See, Ghana is home to some very unique funeral traditions that are aimed at celebrating the life of the deceased person rather than just mourning their death. For example, the Ga people of southern Ghana have a tradition of creating so-called fantasy coffins for their deceased. These coffins can be almost anything, from animals to vehicles to musical instruments to a shoe, usually reflecting the personality or occupation of the deceased. A fisherman might be buried in a fish as their coffin, for example. 69. Cape Verde. Cape Verde was the smallest country by land area to qualify for a World Cup ever, before that spot was taken by Curaçao just 5 weeks later. But did you know that Cape Verde had no people before the year 1456? And even that was just when European navigators first discovered it. No one actually lived on the islands before the year 1462, when the Portuguese founded a settlement on Santiago Island. And it only took them 563 years to qualify for the World Cup. 65. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina has two names because I'm not even gonna try to explain the history of this country. But did you know that BNH has 3 presidents? Now, I don't want to explain the politics of this country either, but here we go. See, Bosnia and Herzegovina is composed of 3 major ethnic groups: the Bosniaks, the Serbs, and the Croats. And because having only one of these groups hold the presidency at a time could be a little problematic, they decided to just let them all have it, all at the same time. Genius. At every general election, each group votes for a person to represent them as one of the presidents, forming a 3-member presidency. However, to actually keep things running smoothly, each member is rotated as the chairperson in 8-month terms. Oh, and Bosnia and Herzegovina also has this tiny 20-kilometer stretch of coastline because Croatia decided to take almost all of it for itself. 63. Jordan. Jordan has 2 Olympic gold medals in men's basketball and scored 32,292 points during his NBA career. Alright, now with the most obvious joke in the world out of the way, here's the fun fact about Jordan, aka this piece of land here. Now obviously, Jordan is home to Petra, the ancient city cut into the Al-Shara mountain range, which was chosen as one of the new 7 wonders of the world. But everyone knows that. So did you know that Jordan was the first Arab country to allow female police officers? No, you did not. The first training school for women's police personnel was established in 1972 in Amman, and female officers have been a staple of Jordan's police force ever since. 61. Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia has a couple of fun facts to choose from, like that it's the largest country with not a single river in the world, and that it has the largest airport in the world by total area. But what you must know is that Saudi Arabia buys sand from Australia. Now, despite the country being essentially just one massive desert, the country is paying Australia hundreds of millions of dollars every year for sand. But despite sounding absolutely ridiculous, the reason for this is actually really boring. See, the sand on the Arabian Peninsula is too smooth to make good concrete, and the sand in Australia is better. 60. South Africa. South Africa has penguins. Now, when you think of South Africa, you think of lions, you think of giraffes, and you think of hippos, but you don't think of penguins. But the South African coast is home to the African penguin, which can be found on several islands and beaches in South Africa and parts of Namibia. Unfortunately though, the species is critically endangered, even with extensive conservation efforts. I'm sorry, that was a sad fact. 57. Iraq. Iraq has been home to some of the oldest civilizations in human history, and as such, it is the home to the oldest known writing system. Thanks to this, Iraq has a lot of the oldest known written texts in the world. Like, here's the world's first written recipe, here's the oldest written name, and here's the oldest written love poem. But Iraq was also the location for the world's oldest written negative Google review. Well, obviously it wasn't on Google, but just listen to this. This is the complaint tablet of Ea Nasser, and it was written 4,000 years ago. The tablet documents a transaction where apparently this guy called Nani was stiffed by a merchant called Ea Nasser, who allegedly sold him low-quality copper. And not only that, but this Ea Nasser guy was also rude to the servant who was sent to fetch the copper. A real piece of work this guy was. So in response, Nani sent a strongly worded letter where he demanded a refund. Now, we don't know how this 4,000-year-old beef between these dudes ended, but my guess is that Ea Nasser sent a tablet back telling Nani to eat shit. 55. Qatar. Now, obviously, Qatar was the host of the previous World Cup in 2022, and is one of the wealthiest countries in the world thanks to their skills in digging. But what you probably didn't know is that one of the favorite pastimes in Qatar is robot camel racing. Yes, you heard that exactly right. See, camel racing has been hugely popular in the country for centuries, which I'm sure is something that doesn't really surprise anyone, and originally children would be used as the riders to reduce the weight carried by the camels. But obviously this had some health and safety issues, so in 2004 the children were replaced by remote-controlled robots. And now if you go to Qatar in the fall and winter months, you can witness perhaps the greatest sport ever invented. When do we have a World Cup for this? 50. Uzbekistan. Along with Curacao, Cape Verde and Jordan, Uzbekistan is one of the 4 teams to make their World Cup debut at this year's tournament, having only been formed in 1992 after the breakup of the Soviet Union. But we're not interested in any of that, because Uzbekistan is home to the world's largest open-pit gold mine. What is that, you ask? Well, usually gold mines are located underground, but an open-pit gold mine is a mining technique where they instead just dig a massive hole. And this is the Muruntau gold deposit in central Uzbekistan. It is about 3 kilometers wide and 3 kilometers long, and it's more than 500 meters deep. The mine produces around 60 metric tons of gold every year, and if you don't know how much 60 metric tons of gold is, it's more than you could afford. 46. DR Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DR Congo, is one of the largest countries in the world, the 11th largest to be exact, and is almost completely covered in a thick rainforest. But our fun fact is that there's a country right next to it called the Republic of the Congo. Both the countries are named after the Congo River, which is where they both decided to build their capitals. In fact, the capitals are just across the river from each other. This is Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC, and this is Brazzaville, the capital of the RC. And as two massive national capitals, you would think that they had a bridge between them, but they don't. In fact, they've been trying to build a bridge between the two cities since 1991, but thus far, every single attempt has run into problems and been cancelled. But this time, they promise they'll have the bridge done by 2028. 44. Tunisia. Tunisia, also known as is largely covered by the Sahara Desert, and the desert landscapes of Tunisia specifically are actually quite famous because they were the filming location of a large part of the Star Wars movies. The Tunisian Sahara was chosen as the backdrop for Luke Skywalker's home planet, Tatooine, which itself was named after the village of Tataouine in southern Tunisia. All in all, scenes for 3 Star Wars movies were filmed in Tunisia, and you can still visit one of the sets used in them near the city of Tozeur. 43. Scotland. Scotland is actually the joint oldest national team in football history, alongside England, as the two played the very first international football match back in 1872. That match ended 0-0, which is coincidentally also the number of international trophies both teams have won since 1966. Scotland is also where golf was invented, and their national animal is a unicorn. But everyone knows those facts, so our fun fact is that the world's first color photograph was taken in Scotland in 1861. The method for color photography was first suggested by a Scottish physicist in the 1850s, who in 1861 commissioned an English photographer to test his method by taking this picture. Now, that is supposed to be a ribbon featuring the traditional Scottish tartan pattern, and it might not look like a lot, because it isn't, but the fact that they were able to produce any color in their photograph must have been even more unbelievable than the fact that it was made in cooperation between a Scot and an Englishman. 41. Czechia. Czechia, also known as the Czech Republic, also known as Bohemia, also known as young European men's favorite holiday destination, is a beautiful country in the heart of Europe. Traditionally better at ice hockey, Czechia will be featuring in their first FIFA World Cup since 2006. But did you know that Czechia is the country that invented the word robot? The term was first coined by the Czech author Karel Čapek in his 1920 play Rozumovi univerzální roboti, or Rozum's Universal Robots in English. The Czech term itself comes from the word robotník, meaning forced worker. So, we might want to come up with a new word before AI takes over the world. Just a thought. 40. Paraguay. Paraguay, also known as Paraguay, is also a beautiful country in the heart of South America this time, and as such, the country is entirely landlocked by its neighbors. Now, this little inconvenience hasn't stopped Paraguay from becoming the 44th largest navy in the world. In fact, it has a larger navy than New Zealand, which is an island nation. Now, this might sound ridiculous, but considering the Paraguay and Paraná rivers are essentially the lifeline of the entire nation, combined with the fact that Paraguay is bordered by countries that are all significantly larger than it, that navy starts to make a lot more sense. 38. Sweden. Sweden has the best neighbor in the world. 34. Ivory Coast. Okay, I'll talk about Sweden. Home of IKEA, Minecraft, and banana and curry on pizza, Sweden is one of the most prosperous countries in the world, characterized by a peaceful, quiet, and simplistic Nordic lifestyle. But Sweden, also known as Sverige by the Swedes and Ruotsi by civilized people, is also home to some very weird stuff. For example, this is the Gävle goat. It is a massive straw goat they construct every Christmas in the Swedish city of Gävle. That's just a thing they do there, don't ask why. But because the goat is made out of straws, every year someone tries to burn it down or destroy it in some other way, while the city government tries to stop them. They do this every year, and by the way, the score is 40-20 to the goat destroyers, who include a snowstorm that blew it over last year. I have a full video on this ridiculous tradition on my channel, so you can go check it out after this one. Now, I'm actually gonna do 2 fun facts about Sweden, just out of neighborly love. Sweden is also one of the most accepting countries towards homosexuality, and in 1944 they made it legal in the country. However, they forgot to do one crucial change. See, homosexuality was still officially classified as a mental illness, and in 1979, a Swedish gay rights group wanted to protest this by showing up at the Swedish Health Agency. Now, the protest was gonna last up to a week, so the protesters needed a way to get out of work for that time. And since homosexuality was classified as a disease, at least one protester actually managed to get sick leave by calling in work and saying,
"Today I feel gay."
34. Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast, or Côte d'Ivoire in French, is one of the biggest footballing nations in Africa, home to such legends of the game as Didier Drogba and Yaya Toure. But outside of football, Ivory Coast is home to the largest church complex in the world. This is the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace in Yamoussoukro, and at least in terms of exterior area, it is larger than St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. However, this area includes a lot of the area outside of the main church building, which itself is much smaller than St. Peter's, so it really isn't the biggest church in the world. 33. Panama. Now, Panama is obviously home to the Panama Canal, which is a canal that passes through Panama. Another creatively named place in Panama is the capital, Panama City, which is a city that is in Panama. An interesting thing about Panama City is that it's the only capital city that has a rainforest within its city limits. This is the Metropolitan Natural Park, which is a protected patch of rainforest less than a 15-minute drive from the city center, where you can see all kinds of monkeys, birds, armadillos, and turtles. You can even see a boa snake before you then subsequently die. 31. Norway. Norway is a country where a bunch of Vikings found oil and then started a mutual investment fund. And like many countries in Europe, one of the highest honors a person can receive in Norway is the rank of knighthood. Several people have been given the rank of knight for outstanding service in the interests of Norway, like Knut Ødegaard, the Norwegian poet, Thorir Hergeirsson, the Icelandic coach of the Norwegian women's handball team, and a penguin. A what? This is Niels Olav III, a resident of the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland and a Major General of the Norwegian Armed Forces. According to Guinness World Records, this makes him the highest ranking penguin in the world. Is there competition for this? Okay, let me actually explain what's going on. So Niels Olav is the mascot of the Norwegian King's Guard, meant to boost morale among the soldiers. The tradition began when the King's Guard visited Edinburgh for a military parade in 1972 and adopted a king penguin from the local zoo as its mascot. The penguin, called Niels Olav, was given the military rank of Lance Corporal and has been promoted every time the King's Guard has returned to the zoo. The current mascot, Niels Olav III, is obviously the third penguin to hold this position because sadly penguins don't live forever, and was promoted to the rank of Major General in 2023. In 2008, the mascot was also given the rank of knighthood by the Norwegian king, and he has a massive bronze statue dedicated to him at the zoo. 30. Canada. Canada is the first of the three host nations in this video, and generally known more for ice hockey, are also the lowest ranked. But while Canada may not have the highest FIFA ranking, they do have the longest street in the world. Take that, US and Mexico. This is Yonge Street, and it is usually considered the longest street in the world, running 57 kilometers north from downtown Toronto. However, because the definition of a street isn't super clear, no one is actually sure what the longest street in reality is. But according to the Guinness World Records at least, all of the most likely candidates are found in Ontario, Canada. There's also Bathurst Street, which runs parallel to Yonge Street and is possibly 59 kilometers long. In the nearby town of Oshawa though, Simcoe Street might be even longer at possibly 80 kilometers. Meanwhile, Guinness World Records currently believe that Airport Road, which runs from Toronto Airport through the countryside of Ontario, is actually the longest street in the world at 81 kilometers. Although, isn't that a road? Alright, so Canada has a world record that no one can verify. Congrats. You know what? I'll just do another fact. Did you know that Winnie the Pooh is Canadian? Well, the actual character doesn't have a nationality, unlike Donald Duck, who is from... let's just move on. But the character is based on a Canadian bear. See, Winnie the Pooh's author, A.A. Milne, named the character after his son's teddy bear, whose name was also Winnie. In turn, his son named the teddy bear Winnie after his favorite black bear in the London Zoo, also called Winnie. Now, Winnie was brought to London from Canada as a military mascot, kind of like that penguin, during World War I by Canadian Lieutenant Harry Colborne, whose name was not Winnie. In turn, he named the bear after his hometown of Winnipeg, Canada, which in turn came from the local First Nation term Winnipi, meaning muddy water. And that's the name they gave to this adorable cartoon bear. On the other hand, Donald Duck's name means Agent of the Third Reich. 29. Egypt. Egypt is actually the oldest national team in Africa and was the first nation outside of Europe or the Americas to participate in the World Cup, having done so in 1934. But our fun fact is that Egypt is so old that the first Egyptologist in history, or a person who studies ancient Egypt, lived in ancient Egypt. And I don't mean he was studying contemporary Egypt during his time because it's ancient to us now. I mean the ancient Egyptian stuff he was studying was already ancient to him. This is Khaim Wasset, the fourth eldest son of Ramses the Great, who lived around the 1200s BC. He spent his life traveling across Egypt studying and restoring monuments like the Pyramid of Unas and the Step Pyramid Complex, which were already more than 1000 years old during his lifetime. He left inscriptions at these restoration projects explaining what they were and of course hyping up how good he was at restoring them, which has actually helped us understand the monuments in modern times. 28. Algeria. Staying in North Africa, we travel next to Algeria, which is actually the largest country in Africa due to it owning a large chunk of the Sahara Desert, and accordingly, the Sahara has played a major role in the country's history. For example, Algeria used to have a camel cavalry unit. See, during the French colonial period in the early 1900s, the French army created the Corps of Camel Cavalry Companies, or Méharistes, to patrol the French territories in the Sahara. The troopers were recruited from the local nomadic Chamba tribe thanks to their skills in camel riding and knowledge of the landscape. And as they were in the desert, it just made the most sense to use camels instead of horses. These units existed through the French colonial period and were even used in battles against the Axis during World War II. After Algeria's independence, these units were disbanded, and the country only retained a small camel force modeled after the Méharistes until that was disbanded too in the 1980s. 27. Australia. Everyone knows Australia. Everyone loves them. They have beaches, they have kangaroos, 25% of the population gets murdered by spiders every year. Australia also fought a war against emus and lost. They did this. But perhaps the greatest thing about Australia is that their former Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, set a world record for downing 2.5 pints of beer in 11 seconds. Hawke, who was the Prime Minister of Australia from 1983 to 1991, studied at Oxford during his youth in the 1950s. And as any good student would, he took part in some extracurricular activities. During one of such activities, he received a punishment for not wearing his academic gown to a dinner. He had to beat an older student in downing 2.5 pints of beer or pay a fine. He was broke at the time though, and he couldn't afford to pay the fine. So in pure desperation, he accidentally set the world record of 11 seconds, becoming an instant legend at Oxford. The least alcoholic Australian. This story became famous in Australia, and even during his retirement in his 80s, he was still getting offered pints to down by members of the Australian public, which he did with ease. Now this place doesn't actually exist. 25. South Korea. South Korea. Samsung, Squid Game, and K-pop. But one thing you need to know about South Korea is its strong delivery culture. South Koreans will use fast delivery services for literally anything, from food to documents to technology to birthday gifts. A lot of countries use delivery services too, but the delivery culture in South Korea is on a different level. But what's even more crazy is that this isn't even like a modern thing. Korean delivery culture dates all the way back to at least the 1700s. The first recorded instance of a food delivery in South Korea is from 1768, when a Korean scholar wrote a diary entry about him and his friends ordering a delivery of noodle soup for lunch. Obviously, deliveries were originally only accessible to people higher up in society, but beginning in the 1900s, they became more and more accessible to regular people, leading to South Korea's fast-paced delivery culture today. 24. Austria. Throughout history, Austria has been home to a lot of famous politicians, like Arnold and Franz Joseph I. Austria is also home to Red Bull, everyone's favorite sports brand. But did you know that the snow globe was invented in Austria? In the late 1800s, an Austrian surgical instrument maker, Erwin Pazzi, invented the snow globe by accident while he was trying to invent a new lamp. The white particles he used in the lamp for reflection purposes reminded him of snowfall, which gave him the idea for the snow globe. His invention then became so popular that he decided to move into the snow globe business instead and opened a shop in Vienna, which still runs today as a family business. 23. Ecuador. Located on the equator, Ecuador literally just means equator in Spanish. In the same way, Sweden just means frozen shithole in Swedish. Ecuador even has a city on the equator called Ciudad Mitad del Mundo, meaning the city in the middle of the world. They don't like being creative here. In turn, the city is home to the Mitad del Mundo monument, marking the line from which the country gets its name. There's just one problem, and it's that it isn't actually on the equator. Like, they fully just built it in the wrong place. It was built back in 1935 when they couldn't get accurate measurements for where the line actually was, so they ended up constructing it around 200 meters south of the actual equator. And today it's a spot where a bunch of tourists go take photos of themselves standing on two hemispheres at the same time. Meanwhile, really, they should be standing here. 22. Turkey. Home to Istanbul, doner kebab, and men on holiday who come home with suspiciously different hairlines, Turkey is one of the most famous countries around the world. But when you think of Turkey, the first thing that comes to your mind probably isn't Christmas. Now, being a majority Muslim country and looking like this for most of the year, that makes a lot of sense. But you probably do have Turkey to thank for all the presents you received as a kid, as Turkey is where Santa Claus is from. See, Santa Claus is based on the 4th century Christian saint, Saint Nicholas, who was a Greek bishop from the city of Patara in modern southwestern Turkey. According to legend, he was born to wealthy Christian parents, and following their death, he took up a habit of giving secret gifts to the unfortunate. The most famous story about him is how he prevented 3 impoverished girls from being forced into prostitution by dropping bags of coins through their window at night. This story then inspired the Dutch folklore figure of Sinterklaas, who eventually inspired the character of Santa Claus that spread around the world. 21. Iran. Iran, also pronounced as Iran, incorrectly, is a country that, for better or worse, the whole world is very familiar with right now. Iran is a beautiful country with a long history, stunning landscapes, and friendly people, but when it comes to the World Cup, Iran is yet to have tremendous success in getting far in the tournament. But we're not here for that. We're here for the important stuff. And one thing you have to know about Iran is that they have their own version of Modern Family. And it's not like an adaptation or anything, it's almost a shot-for-shot copy of the original, except this one is set in Iran. The show was aired in 2014 during Ramadan, with each episode being around 40 to 50 minutes long, or about twice as long as the original, making the remake a lot slower paced. An interesting quirk though about the remake is that obviously Iran has some very strict social customs, so some of the characters had to be changed completely. Portrayal of friendships between boys and girls, for example, is not permitted on Iranian television. So Haley and Dylan are now Amir and Anush. Homosexuality is also strictly forbidden, so Mitch and Cam are now Berus and Elam. A lot of the original subplots are also removed in the remake due to their sexual or romantic themes. Yet even still, the episodes are somehow twice as long. This was also not the last time they did this, as the next year they decided to do a remake of Friends, except in Tehran instead of Manhattan. 19. Switzerland. Switzerland, home of Swiss cheese, Swiss chocolate, Swiss watches, Swiss army knives. Honestly, if it has Swiss at the start of it, it's probably from Switzerland. Switzerland is also one of a selection of countries in Europe to have a mandatory military service for its adult male population. What makes Switzerland different though is that in the Swiss military, it's traditional for the soldiers to take their assault rifle home with them, even after their military service has ended. The idea behind this is that as a small nation in the middle of much larger countries, Switzerland needs a militia that can quickly respond to foreign threats. That's their second line of defense. Their first line of defense is to offer them banking services, and the Swiss are quite fond of their guns. Since 2010, Swiss servicemen have had the option of storing their weapon at a local military base as well, but most seem to prefer keeping them at home. Today there are over 2 million guns in circulation in Switzerland, with a population of only around 8 million, giving them one of the highest gun ownership rates in the world. 18. Japan. Now, everyone knows Japan. The influence they've had on global culture can't be understated. From food to video games to television to movies to card games to just pure vibes, Japan is one of the most admired nations in the world. People will watch one episode of an anime and turn Japan into their entire personality. For such a well-known country, it's hard to come up with a fun fact that isn't known by literally everyone. But one of my favorite facts is that Japan has a city that is filled with free roaming deer that know how to bow. This is Nara, a city of around 400,000 in southern Japan, and it is home to around 1,200 Japanese deer that roam the streets of the city freely. The deer are considered to be sacred according to the local Shinto beliefs, and they can be found especially in and around the city's Nara Park. Locals and tourists are allowed to feed the deer with special rice crackers that can be bought from street vendors and vending machines around the park, and some of the deer have learned how to bow to ask to be fed by the passers-by. I went to this park as a kid, and it's honestly one of the best places in Japan. 17. Uruguay. Despite being quite a small nation with only around 3.5 million people, Uruguay has had a pretty impressive record at the World Cup. They were one of the most dominant footballing nations from the 1920s to the 1950s, winning 2 World Cups and 2 Olympic gold medals in that time. Uruguay also hosted the very first World Cup in 1930, which they also won. Lately, Uruguay hasn't been as strong, their latest trophy being from the Copa America in 2011. But while not being the top footballing nation anymore, Uruguay is the #1 in beef consumption per capita in the world. Obviously, accurate numbers on this are hard to get, but some estimates place Uruguay's beef consumption at around 60 kilograms per person per year, putting it ahead of countries like Argentina, Brazil, and the United States. And that's quite an achievement. Now, I have to say that there are also a lot of estimates that don't place Uruguay as the #1 in beef consumption, as it's kind of hard to know for sure, but I guess the main point is that Uruguayans really like beef. Eating beef. What we do know though is that Uruguay has the most cows per person in the world, with around 12 million cows, or about 3.5 cows per person. The second spot is held by New Zealand, which only has 2.1 cows per person. 16. United States.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word.
The USA, also known as the America, is a little known country located right next to the Bahamas. So now you know where it is. And the USA is so well liked around the world that it was chosen to be the main host of this year's World Cup. Okay, jokes aside, our second host nation of this video is probably the most recognizable country in the world. American media, companies, food, music, and whatever this is, can be found all over the world. Probably the only thing that America hasn't exported across the globe are its sports, yet somehow the winner of their domestic leagues are still called world champions. And don't say to me that the World Series champions, for example, are obviously the best team in the world. Literally no one plays pesäpallo except Finland, yet we don't call the winner of Superpesis the world champion. Anyway, one thing you probably didn't know about the US is that they have quite a large military. In fact, the United States spends more on its military than the next 6 highest countries combined. Now, with that amount of spending, the US military has put money into some very weird stuff. For example, the US military once spent hundreds of thousands in today's money trying to train pigeons to guide missiles. This was Project Pigeon, which they later renamed to Project Orkan for organic control, because they thought Project Pigeon would make the whole thing sound a bit silly. The project originally launched during World War II, when the US Navy was trying to find a way to create a guided missile, and as the size of the early guidance systems made them practically useless, they decided to use pigeons instead, as a simple but effective solution. An original budget of $25,000 was set for the research project, which is nearly $500,000 in today's money, and the scientists began conditioning pigeons to steer the missiles by pecking targets on screens set in front of them. Now, the project ran into some problems. The chief scientist notably complained that their problem was that no one would take them seriously. I mean, you really should have called your project something better, like Kamikaze Bird Death Squad. Unsurprisingly, the project was scrapped, and the pigeons never saw military action. But then, after the war, for some reason, the US Navy decided to bring the project back, this time called Project Orkan, which, to be honest, doesn't sound much better. To me at least, Orkan sounds like a socially awkward orc that has an iron deficiency. However, as electronic guidance systems became significantly smaller and more accurate, the project was scrapped again after 5 years. Wait, they were doing this for 5 years? 15. Mexico. Mexico is our final host nation to show up in this video, and are also the highest rated by being just one FIFA ranking spot higher than the US. Mexico is world famous for their food, their beaches, and their unique holiday celebrations. Now, Okay, I'm gonna turn off this stupid filter. Now, Mexico has a lot of fun facts to choose from, like that it's the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, they drink the most Coca-Cola per capita, and that Mexico City is sinking. No, actually, that's a horrifying fact. But did you know that Mexico introduced popcorn to the world? Now, popcorn is obviously the goat of snacks, but it's way older than you think. Just try to guess, how old do you think popcorn actually is? The world's first movie theater opened in the late 1800s, but did popcorn exist before that? If you think yes, you're correct, because popcorn already existed in the early 1800s. And well, that's because popcorn has existed for at least 6,000 years. Corn was first domesticated in what's now central Mexico 9,000 years ago, and it didn't take them long to figure out that corn plus fire equals very good snack time. 14. Senegal. Senegal has recently become one of the footballing powerhouses in world football and are looking to make their deepest run yet in this year's edition of the World Cup. But while football is the most popular sport in Senegal, there is another sport that comes very close. Senegalese wrestling, or lam, is the national sport of Senegal, and it is a massive spectator sport in the country, as these fights regularly attract tens of thousands of spectators. They even have a massive stadium built specifically for the sport in the country's capital of Dakar. The goal of the sport is to either throw the opponent outside of a circular ring or to throw them off their feet, unlike American wrestling, where the goal is to talk smack about your opponent for 15 minutes and then fly to Hollywood to make millions while being the worst actor to ever exist. 13. Colombia. We're back in South America to one of the most colorful, beautiful, and most biodiverse countries in the world. Colombia is known for its coffee, bananas, shakira, as well as other stuff. And just like Senegal and, well, most countries in the world, football is the most popular sport in Colombia. But did you know that the national sport of Colombia is explosive disc throwing? This is tejo, a traditional Colombian throwing sport that has its roots in the pre-colonial era. The goal of the sport is to throw a metal disc, called tejo, inside a circular target at the end of a field. The most recognizable part about the sport, though, are the small envelopes of gunpowder, called mechas, placed on the target that explode on impact. You actually get more points if you manage to blow up one of these mini targets, and the best score you can get is 9 points if you manage to throw the tejo inside the target while also blowing a mecha on the same go. 12. Italy. Oh, they aren't at the World Cup? 11. Croatia. With only 3.9 million people, the things that Croatia has managed to achieve in the World Cup are genuinely insane. 2 third-place finishes in 1998 and 2022, and that final loss in 2018 are better than the World Cup record of some of the quote-unquote big football nations since the national team's founding in 1990. But we're not going to talk about that, because I want to talk more about popcorn. Croatia is the world record holder for the largest popcorn box ever created. In 2011, the international cinema operator Cineplex, which is actually Austrian, held an event to celebrate the opening of 2 new malls, complete with 2 new Cineplex cinemas in Croatia. At the event, they decided to attempt to break the world record for the largest box of popcorn, which they achieved pretty easily. I mean, all they had to do was build a really big box. The box had a volume of 52.59 cubic meters, which is a number that means absolutely nothing to you or me, but it is really big. And the box took 1 hour and 57 minutes to fill. 10. Germany. With Germany, we finally reached the top 10, at least in terms of FIFA rankings, of our list. Germany is home to beer, Lederhosen, beer gardens, pretzels, festivals about beer, weird techno clubs, and women in dirndls drinking beer. But our fun fact about Germany is that if you're a beekeeper in Germany, you're allowed to enter any private property as long as you try to follow the queen. And I'm not talking about those queens. See, in Germany, the beekeeper of a bee colony is the owner of all the bees in that colony. This is probably also the case in other countries, but I hope you'll excuse me if I didn't want to go through the bee legislation of every single country on Earth. This means that if a swarm escapes, it is still the property of the beekeeper for as long as they go after it. And according to section 962 of the German Civil Code, yes, we are diving deep for this one, the beekeeper even has the right to enter other people's private property if it's required to continue their pursuit. Now, usually the swarm follow the queen, so the beekeeper's best tactic is to just follow the queen and snatch it as quickly as possible, because if they manage to escape, the swarm is no longer legally the beekeeper's property. 9. Belgium. We're staying in Europe, which will become kind of a theme for the last 10 countries on this list, and we're traveling to the Low Countries, to Belgium. Belgium is home to beer, chocolate, famous beer brands, waffles, monastery beer, and French fries? Should I just say fries? Obviously, Brussels is known for being the capital of the EU, as well as the headquarters for many other international organizations, like NATO. You might even know that it actually rains more in Belgium than it does in England. But did you know that New York City was founded by a Belgian guy? This is Pieter Minuit, who was a merchant and a politician during the early Dutch colonization of North America in the 15 and 1600s. Now, Pieter was actually born in what is now Germany, where he also lived most of his life, before moving to the Dutch colony of New Netherland, so he never actually lived in what is now Belgium. But his parents were both from the southern Belgian region of Wallonia, and had left the country due to religious persecution, so he is usually listed as Walloon, which would make him Belgian today. Anyway, Pieter was appointed the director of New Netherland in 1626, and one of the first actions he had to take was the acquisition of an island with a deep natural harbor that the Dutch had been eyeing for a long time. Pieter purchased Manhattan from the local Native American tribe for traded goods valued at 60 guilders, or about $1,700 in today's money, although it is likely that the local tribe didn't actually understand the deal they had just agreed to. Anyway, it didn't take long for the Dutch to start constructing a fort on the island, which eventually turned into the town of New Amsterdam, later becoming New York City. 8. Morocco. Morocco is the only African nation in the top 10 of the FIFA rankings, having been dominant for the past half a decade and having reached the semifinals of the previous World Cup. Morocco is a country of a mix of Arab, Berber, and Andalusian cultures, with interesting architecture, history, and food. But what you must know about Morocco is that it has tree-climbing goats. Yes, this is actually real. Now the thing is that these goats don't actually do this naturally. They're trained to do this by the local farmers. Now, why would the local farmers train their goats to do this? You might ask. Well, it doesn't actually have any practical purpose. Like, they just get the goats to go up there and stand for hours. And the reason is that tourists will pay them tips for taking pictures with them. See, Morocco has been experiencing some severe droughts recently, which isn't a great recipe for growing crops. So starting in the early 2000s, some desperate farmers started training their goats to start climbing up trees in order to gain extra revenue from baffled tourists. I don't know how they came to the conclusion that they should start putting goats up trees, but it seemed to work. And as a result, a bunch of other farmers started doing the same. And now it's its own tourist attraction, bringing in thousands of tourists every year and being the fun fact about Morocco in stupid YouTube videos. 7. Netherlands. The Netherlands is home to tall people, stroopwafels, the least ergonomic shoes imaginable, and a lot of pretty little cafes that may sell some other stuff as well. But the most important thing to know about the Netherlands is that the Dutch keep a calendar of their friends' birthdays in their bathroom. Yes, the verjaardagskalender, or the birthday calendar, is a very common sight in Dutch bathrooms across the country. Now, obviously, the point of the calendar is to keep track of all your friends' birthdays. The odd part is that it has to be in your bathroom. Like, if you have it in your kitchen, you will be put on a list. So why is it in the bathroom? Well, name another room in your house that you visit every day and just end up staring at the door the whole time you're there. Also, it's prohibited to write your own name in the calendar, so if you ever visit your friend's house in the Netherlands and don't see your name there, it's just because they don't really like you all that much. 6. Brazil. For pretty much all of football's history, Brazil has been one of the most dominant teams in the world, and recently they have been one of the teams in the world. Brazil is one of the most recognizable countries in the world with its carnivals, beaches, food, landmarks, and nature. Brazil's largest city, São Paulo, is also the largest city in the Americas, bigger than New York or Mexico City. But did you know that São Paulo once elected a rhino as its mayor? This is Cacareco, a 5-year-old female black rhinoceros exhibited at the São Paulo Zoo in 1959. 1959 was also the year of a city council election in the city. Now, the city council had long been embroiled in accusations of corruption, and the people of São Paulo were starting to get fed up. And as the candidates for the new city council were not looking much better, one journalist in São Paulo began advocating for Cacareco to become a council member as a protest vote. And even though the rhino's candidacy was obviously not accepted by the electoral officials, many others joined in voting for Cacareco. 100,000 others to be precise, which meant that Cacareco actually had more votes in the election than any other candidate or any other political party, meaning that she would have become the next mayor had she not been disqualified. This is the true hero they deserved.
I never said thank you.
5. Portugal. Sticking with the Portuguese-speaking countries, next up we have Portugal. Portugal is famous for its wine, blue tile azulejos, historic cities, and pastel de nata. mainly Pastel de Nata. Portugal, of course, had one of the largest maritime empires in history, which is why only around 3% of Portuguese speakers actually live in Portugal. This maritime history has not only had an impact of how many people around the world speak Portuguese, but also in languages that aren't Portuguese. Surprisingly, Japanese has a large amount of vocabulary that came from Portuguese. This is because Portugal was the first European nation to reach Japan and establish direct trade between the island nation and Europe. And it was the Portuguese traders and Jesuit priests who introduced the Japanese to a lot of these words. Some of the most common words today include pan, which comes from the Portuguese pão, meaning bread, botan, from the Portuguese botão, meaning button, and manto, from the Portuguese manto, meaning cloak. It is also often mistakenly said that the Japanese word arigato, meaning thank you, comes from the Portuguese obrigado, but they are actually two completely different words. 4. For pretty much all of football's history, England has been one of the teams in the world. England is obviously a place that most people know. Mr. Bean, tea, lots of rain, although less than Belgium, and this guy called Count Binface, describing himself as an independent space warrior who has been running for public office in England for the past 8 years. Now, England, the most normal country on earth, is one of the most, if not the most, football-obsessed countries on earth. England is usually considered the birthplace of modern football, as the first official rules of the game were established in the country in 1863. Now obviously football has been played all around the world in some form for thousands of years, but these rules created in England in the 1800s is really what created the modern association football as we know it. With over 40,000 football clubs, England has more teams playing football than any other country in the world, and England is also the only country to have 5 professional tiers in their football pyramid. All this to never win anything, but England's football tradition goes back centuries, possibly millennia, due to which England is home to a large variety of ball sports referred to as medieval football. Medieval football, also known as Shrovetide football, folk football, and mob football, is a collection of informal football games, unsurprisingly dating back to the medieval times. These games were different types of football matches played in towns and villages around England, typically on Christian holidays. The rules of these games varied greatly, but typically these matches divided the town into 2 teams, who would each try to carry or kick a designated object to a goal on either end of the town. A lot of these games have survived to this day, with one of the most famous ones being the Royal Shrovetide football match, played in the town of Ashburn. The game is played between the upwards, or those born in the north of the town, and the downwards, those born in the south. And the goal is to take the ball into your own goal, in your end of the town, by any means necessary, which is usually done by carrying and throwing instead of kicking. The game has very few rules, and a lot of the local businesses board up their storefronts in anticipation of the event. Mainly, you aren't allowed to murder anyone. That's good. You aren't allowed to carry the ball with a motorized vehicle, and you aren't allowed to hide the ball in a bag. 3. Argentina. Argentina are of course the current world champions, having won in Qatar in 2022, and are one of the major footballing nations, having been home to the likes of Messi and Maradona. Argentina is one of the largest countries on earth, being home to rainforests, mountains, deserts, vast open plains, and even glaciers. Argentina has also been described as a country of immigrants, as well as a melting pot by the locals, with the vast majority of Argentinians having European ancestry. And despite being a former Spanish colony, nearly 60% of Argentinians have some Italian ancestry, like for example Messi and Maradona. Argentina is also home to notable populations of Asians, Arabs, and a suspiciously large population of German immigrants from the 1940s. But did you know that Argentina is home to a notable population of Welsh speakers? See, Welsh people began arriving in Argentina around the middle of the 1800s and started settlements mostly in the Chubut Valley in Patagonia. The original idea was to establish a Welsh colony somewhere remote, where it would be free of foreign, mostly English, influences. And Patagonia was chosen as it was pretty much as far away from England as you could get. And even though most Welsh Argentinians have now turned to speaking Spanish, there are still thousands of Welsh speakers in Argentina, mainly centered around the town of Gaiman. 2. Spain. Spain is a country where people take afternoon naps, eat appetizers as a meal, and have their lives ruined by British tourists. Spain is also very culturally diverse, with the regions of Catalonia and the Basque Country famously having a strong sense of their own national identity, with a great sense of regional identity also existing in regions like Galicia, Andalusia, and Asturias. As such, Spain is home to a lot of local cultural festivals, like the running of the bulls in Pamplona, the shaving of the horse manes in Galicia, the wine battle in Aro, and the Human Towers festivals in Catalonia. But one of my favorite ones is La Tomatina Matina in Buñol near Valencia, where tens of thousands of people gather in the town every year for an hour to throw tomatoes at each other. The festival is so popular, in fact, that they had to start ticketing it with a limited capacity of 20,000 as to not overwhelm the town with a population of only 9,000. The festival started in the 1940s when a group of young people decided to have a tomato fight in the town square, and although the fight was ended by the police, the boys decided to turn it into a yearly tradition, and in the following years, more and more people began to join them. The Spanish government initially tried to ban the festival, which only made the people want to do it even more, eventually forcing the government to cave in. And with the popularization of the television in Spain, more and more people began learning about the festival, making it famous nationally and eventually internationally. 1. France. France, the favorite country of every boomer American tourist, and the most hated country by everyone else, is one of the most politically and culturally influential countries on Earth. 4.3% of the Earth's surface is covered by France, but 100% of the Earth's surface is covered by N'Golo Kante.
Thank you.
France is also one of the oldest nation-states in the world, having been founded all the way back in the 800s. And during their long history, France has done some pretty weird stuff. Meanwhile, the Germans are doing some pretty weird stuff in Berlin right now. For example, in the year 1510, France put a group of rats on trial. See, the rats had been destroying fields of barley in Autun, France, causing significant financial losses to the local farmers. The locals, fed up with the vandalic rodents, demanded the local bishop to solve the problem. His solution? Put the rats on trial. Now, this sounds silly, and it was, but it was actually fairly common to put animals on trial in medieval Europe. Pigs were often put on trial and executed as they lived close to humans and were often the cause for deaths for children. In 1474 in Switzerland, a rooster was also sentenced to death in Basel when the townspeople mistakenly thought that the rooster had laid an egg. Why didn't I make that the fun fact for Switzerland? Anyway, the rats needed a lawyer to defend them, and for this, the reputable Barthélemy de Chassenus was assigned to the case. Barthélemy argued that no one could be sure of who the exact rats were that had done the damage, and therefore they couldn't be ordered to court. The judge replied by ordering all of the rats in the area to appear in court by a specific date, and when they didn't, obviously, all the rats in the area had just disobeyed the court's orders, making them criminally liable. Barthélemy defended his clients, however, pointing out that the law stated that an individual couldn't be ordered to court if the journey to the courthouse put their life in danger. The rats would have to pass through the town, which was filled with cats, and therefore Barthélemy argued that they couldn't legally be ordered to court. The prosecutor couldn't come up with a counter-argument, and as a result, the rats were never criminally convicted. Barthélemy became a famous lawyer in France, and the locals kept having their fields destroyed by the rats. What a happy ending. If you made it this far in this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It would really help out a ton. Also, if you enjoyed this fun facts video about every country at the World Cup, you'll probably also enjoy this video featuring a fun fact about every city in Germany. Bonus fact: Finland sucks and has never been to the World Cup.